The Great Southern Reef is a rocky reef dominated by kelp forests stretching 8,000 kilometres from Cowbarry to Brisbane. As a biodiversity hotspot for seaweeds, sponges, crustaceans and mollusks, up to 80% of these species are not found anywhere else in the world. But the reef is not just a playground for marine life. Whale watchers, fishermen, divers and surfers enjoy the benefits of the reef as well.
The footprint of the Great Southern Reef is entirely based on the distribution of the golden kelp, Maclonia radiata, and that's the foundation species in this environment. The growth of kelp is kind of like the engine room driving the system.
Kelp, also known as seaweed, is a macroalgae belonging to the kingdom of protist, making it significantly different from plants. Whereas often confused with seagrass, kelp does not have roots but grows on hard ground surfaces such as rocks and reefs. With at least 30 different species, kelp covers 25% of the world's coastlines. In the Great Southern Reef, kelp forests form hotspots of biodiversity by providing important habitat for sea lions, sponge crabs, abalones, moonlighter fish, flathead fish, bobtail squids, pajama squids, weedy sea dragons and large animals such as the southern right whale. But there is more to it. Studies have found that waters around kelp forests are less acidic. Ocean acidification is a problem that continues to increase as more carbon is being absorbed by the ocean. During photosynthesis, kelp produces oxygen that helps to stabilise the pH level of the water and therefore reduces ocean acidification. At the same time, kelp competes with microalgae for nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus and therefore can prevent harmful algal blooms, also known as eutrophication.
So there's increasing evidence that kelp forests can provide coastal protection by attenuating incoming wave energy, but until now there have only been a few studies and results have been somewhat contradictory. Laboratory studies have found wave height reduction up to 50%, while field observations have shown a reduction of up to 10% or sometimes no effect at all. So what we do know is that the effect is species dependent and it varies greatly with plant properties, such as the size and flexibility.
Lastly, there are multiple ways in which kelp can help mitigate climate change.
Since these organisms are amongst the fastest growing on Earth, that means that they really sort of take up a lot of carbon dioxide as they grow. But that doesn't mean that all that carbon gets sequestered, and that is what is actually being researched at the moment. So from all the carbon that they take up as they grow, how much ends up in these sort of like long-term reservoirs where the carbon is sort of locked away from the atmosphere.
One of these long-term reservoirs could be the deep sea. As kelp dies, it naturally sinks to deeper waters and takes part of the stored carbon with it, where it can be locked up for thousands of years. This could mean that the role of kelp in climate change mitigation is way bigger than currently estimated. However, this doesn't mean that we have found a new tool to fight climate change. If kelp was able to sequester big rates of carbon, it was already doing that for the past million years. What it means instead is that we should increase our focus on protecting kelp forests in order to not lose essential carbon sinks. But with all these great benefits, why does nobody talk about kelp?
One aspect that I think might explain why these environments have been a bit overlooked is that people haven't been exposed so much to images of these environments, whether that's through documentaries or through promotional advertising for tropical holidays, So what that means is that people don't really know what these environments look like. They have trouble visualizing what it looks like, and they're not really sure whether it's something that they want to check out.
It's not just the benefits of kelp that we need to raise awareness for. In many regions of the world, kelp forests are drastically declining, and so are their astonishing benefits.
Kelp forests are under threat globally. We're losing about 2% of our kelp forests every year. And around the world, but also in Australia, we're losing them due to a variety of threats. And that includes climate change impacts, but also pollution and different interactions with species as they change.
Generally, kelp thrives at temperatures reaching from 5 to 20 degrees Celsius as they depend on the higher nutrient load of these waters. Rising temperatures in turn lead to decreased nutrient loads and ultimately can starve kelp forests.
each species has its own sort of temperature threshold, but then what is common amongst all species is when this temperature threshold gets exceeded by usually like at least 2 or 3 degrees, then is when we start registering these mass mortality effects.
Sewage waste often contains high loads of solid matter, leading to sedimentation where small kelps are buried or light is unable to travel through the water. The same sewage might contain increased nutrient loads, either causing direct damage or leading to eutrophication. That can again limit the sunlight reaching kelps and therefore inhibits photosynthesis. In other regions of the world, disturbances in the ecosystem itself are causing the decline of kelp. Sea urchins and herbivoreal fish are the main predators of kelp forests, but their populations have been growing drastically. Hunting, diseases or oil spills have caused the decline of otters and other fish species that feed on urchins. Without the presence of predators, sea urchins are free to graze and will eventually take over the sea floor by replacing lush kelp forests with so-called urchin barrens.
Here in Western Australia, we've especially seen the decline of our golden kelp forests, which is a foundational species, and that's mainly from a marine heatwave that Western Australia experienced in 2011. We lost about 100,000 hectares, which is a very large area of kelp, and it has not returned.
But this is not the end of it. Because more tropical species can thrive in these warmer conditions, researchers were able to observe the formation of turf reefs, followed by actual southward shifts of tropical species, called tropicalization.
We saw the loss of a lot of fishery stock in the Abalonian rock lobster fishery as well. So it's not just the environment, the ecosystem that's affected when these kelp forests decline, it's the people as well.
But what about the future? According to the IPCC report, temperatures as well as the occurrence of extreme weather events like heat waves will continue to increase under any of the current emission scenarios. At the same time, global population is expected to reach 10 billion people by the year 2050, which will be accompanied with increased coastal development and subsequent pollution. But there is hope. Conservation projects worldwide are working towards protecting, restoring and adapting kelp forests to increasing anthropogenic threats. Through changes in local policies and improved water treatment, kelp forests can be successfully protected from effects of point source pollution. But unlike national parks on land, the ocean cannot be fenced. Marine sanctuary zones can protect against fishing, hunting or emissions from boats, but the ocean remains a dynamic and interconnected system that cannot restrict the impacts of non-point source pollution or changes in species dynamics. Other times, protection efforts come simply too late. After the marine heatwave in 2011, golden kelp went locally extinct across 100 kilometres of its northern distribution in Western Australia. This decline stimulated many research projects to actively restore kelp forests in these areas. Green gravel is one of these new techniques.
We grow golden kelp in the aquarium here at Waterman's Bay facility, and after a few months it gets large enough to actually be redeployed onto degraded reefs in the field. So essentially we call this process green gravel because we grow kelps on rocks and gravel and then we throw them back over the side of the boat into the ocean.
However, when restoring kelp forest, or really any species, it becomes inevitable to determine not only the stresses that cause the decline, but also the initial drivers.
In the case of climate change, we are seeing ongoing climate change, and even if we reduced our carbon emissions now, we're going to continue to see climate change impacts around the world's oceans. So that's why we're really focusing on trying to future-proof or restore resilient populations, and we do that by focusing on seaweed genetics to try to find seaweeds that may have genes that give them more resilience or thermal tolerance in the event of a marine heatwave. Once we've proved that this can work to restore kelp forests that have been lost, we can actually use the same tools to seed populations that are more resilient across the distributional range of golden kelp to help enhance genetic diversity and adaptive capacity to novel environments under futures of change.
Despite the urgency of restoring and adapting kelp forests to future threats, research has been comparatively low. Studies have shown that kelp conservation and research lag significantly behind other coastal ecosystems such as coral or mangroves. This is partially due to a lack of public awareness about the existence of the Great Southern Reef and the benefits kelp forests provide. Therefore, education can be a successful tool to build knowledge and awareness that in the long term can lead to increased research investments. One group that has focused on exactly this is the Great Southern Reef Foundation.
So the objective of the Great Southern Reef Foundation is to try and raise the profile of the Great Southern Reef so that it becomes a household name just as much as any of the big and important natural environments in Australia.
With the increasing recognition of the Great Southern Reef, what does that mean for the future of kelp forests?
I think it's a very exciting time for the Great Southern Reef. We're finally starting to look at it as a big interconnected system, and giving it a name, giving it an identity means that there's something solid there for people to think about. That they're not just thinking about the kelp forest that's near them, but they're thinking about it as a whole system.